This episode is sponsored by Bark Technologies, a parental controls company for parents who are looking to protect their children from online harms that you will learn about today. I am so grateful that parents have resources like Bark to help make our kids' entire digital experience safer. Welcome to Scrolling to Death. Today I'm joined by author, psychologist, and award-winning ventriloquist, Dr. Susan Linn. Hi.
Hi.
I've been so eager to talk to you, and I definitely want to get into the ventriloquism piece. I'm super interested in that. A little hint for listeners, you appeared on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood a few times, right?
I did.
Let's get back to that, and let's start with talking about your book. So
Okay.
It's called Who's Raising the Kids? Big Tech, Big Business, and the Lives of Children. And reading your book got me thinking about all kinds of things. So I'm a parent to 3 young kids, 8, 6, and 3 years old.
Oh, wow.
So a lot of relevant content in here for me and for older parents with older kids as well. But I'd love to take us through a few of the themes in the book and have you kind of expand and educate parents along the way.
Okay.
Okay. I'm going to start by reading the quote that you started the book with by American writer Russell Banks. The quote is, "This society transforms its children into consumers, making them want in order to sell them and their parents not what the children need, but what they have been made to want. What they want, not what they need. It commodifies and monetizes its children. It objectifies them. It dehumanizes them." So, Susan, why did you choose that quote to start off the book with?
First of all, I love Russell Banks and his novels, and he gave this lecture at Harvard Divinity School that was all about marketing to kids several years ago. And I wrote to him and met him, and he was as passionate about this as I am. And I thought that his quote just beautifully summed up what the real problem is with our commercialized, digitized culture today.
Okay. And yeah, in culture today, it's just standard that children will be marketed to everywhere they look. So they receive ads on their tablets at home, on their school-issued devices. They are products to these big tech companies, the social media companies. Every toy they play with is created to sell something else. And I don't want parents to gloss over the marketing to kids is no big deal. So you stated in your book, marketing to children is both remarkably effective and deeply harmful to their growth, development, and well-being. So can you speak to that harm? Like what specifically is harmful about our children being marketed to?
There are so many things because kids are marketed to in lots of different ways. I mean, marketing is a factor in so many of the problems facing children today. You know, we could go to childhood obesity, eating disorders, precocious sexuality, youth violence, family stress, the erosion of creative play, which is, something dear to my heart and is the foundation of learning and creativity, constructive problem solving, and the capacity to wrestle with life to make it human. And also, something that's become increasingly concerning is the escalation of materialistic values and the false notion that the things we buy will make us happy. And that's of particular concern today because we are in the middle of a climate crisis that is rooted in overconsumption. And so by basically training kids to consume and training them to believe in the value of consumption and that consumption is a road to happiness is really teaching them to continue to destroy the planet. I mean, basically, they're contributing to their own misery and possibly ultimately death.
Wow. Okay. So what do you think about Jonathan Haidt's new movement in his new book where one of his 4 new norms that he recommends is for parents to really focus on providing their children with a play-based childhood and give them unstructured playtime?
I'm delighted with Jonathan Haidt's book, and I think he's done a real service by focusing even more attention on tech in schools and, the problems of what he calls a phone-based childhood.
Yeah.
So I think that he's right that it is important for parents to ensure that kids have, enough free time and space and silence and inspiration to play creatively. But I think that it's a mistake and it's harmful to focus this completely on parents. And this is a societal issue that is caused by decisions we make as a society. And so I think that it's important, it's critical to look at the corporations themselves that are encouraging parents to keep kids on phones and on screens all day, and to look at the fact that as a society, we tend to prioritize corporate interests over the well-being of children. I think it's a mistake to see this as an individual or family issue. It's a societal issue. And it's not going to get better unless we make some structural changes.
Well, it feels like we're being duped. Like they're trying to trick us into thinking that technology is the better option for raising our kids.
Most of marketing is duping, really.
Yeah,
I mean, that's the whole purpose of it.
Right.
But I think that a problem is for young children is that the messages that parents get tend to come from marketing and from corporations, and they're not getting enough information about what research tells us that children really need.
Right.
I mean, I think that, among other things, we need a massive, well-designed public health campaign around child development, around early child development, and around what kids really need. And the last thing young children need is to be, put in front of a screen for hours a day.
No. And it's unfair that this does feel like it's put on parents. It does feel like we have to be the ones to make the safe decisions, try to figure out what is safe. And you mentioned schools. I want to transition a little bit to educational technology, companies that tell us that certain things are educational. So many parents that don't want their kids on tablets all the time, but they say, you can do educational things. So we're being told that a lot of times certain apps are educational, even in schools. But I feel like the line is kind of blurred between what's educational and what's entertaining. For me, one example, and you gave it in the book, was Baby Einstein. Like we thought that would make our kids little geniuses, but turns out that was not the case at all. So is there any way that parents can truly differentiate between something on a device that's educational versus just like a marketing tool?
I think that for babies and toddlers, there's nothing that's educational or helpful or beneficial about screens, even though there's so much that is being marketed as educational for babies. Babies learn, and young children learn by exploring the world with all of their senses. They learn in relationship to human beings, to the people who love them. They don't learn from a device. I mean, there's research showing that babies, for instance, can't learn language from a device. It has to be from a human being. And I think that one of the things that's particularly concerning about big tech and big business today is that basically the message that we're getting is that people are replaceable. People are replaceable by machines. We can have friends who are bots. We don't have to write anything because ChatGPT will do it for us. And when it comes to being parents of very young children, these devices claim to be able to take on roles that traditionally belong to parents.
Right.
They will read to your baby. They will sing lullabies to your baby. They claim to soothe your baby. It's really, scary because we're depriving babies of basically what they need most in the world.
Yeah.
And it's important for people to remember that the relationship between a baby, a toddler, a young child and the adults in their life, I mean, those relationships are foundational, and they're the basis for learning and thriving and being able to have meaningful relationships in the world.
Yeah. You mentioned like brain development. So when you're interacting with babies face to face, like it's really helping their brains to fire and develop those neurons. So there's the choice of whether or not to give your baby a device to learn from or bide their time or engage with. There's also the choice of what toys to give them. A quote you wrote in the book is by another author named Kathy Hirsch Pasek. She said, "The secret sauce is not fancy toys and computers and electronics. Things that allow their imagination to run wild, like play and relaxation. That's what builds a really good brain." And you shared that the activities that young children spend their time doing have important lifelong ramifications. Repeated behaviors can become biologically compelled habits. So our choices as parents are very important, especially in those younger years. And when we hand that child an iPad day after day, that is a choice that will change the way their brain is wired. Can you speak a little bit more to that? Like, how will our child be affected if they are overusing devices in these little baby years?
Have you ever watched a baby or a toddler with an iPad or with a tablet or a phone?
Unfortunately. Yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, they are completely glued to it. I mean, the reality is that what's on a screen is phenomenally compelling. Whatever it is, I mean, it's compelling to adults, but it's also compelling to babies and toddlers. But the fact that it's compelling doesn't mean that it's necessarily good for them. So the babies that I've watched or the toddlers that I've watched, their heads are down and they are completely focused on the screen, and they are swiping, tapping, or enlarging. I mean, they've learned those hand motions.
Yeah.
But that's all they're doing. I mean, they're not vocalizing. They tend to be silent, and they're not exploring the world with all of their senses. I mean, if you watch babies with blocks, for instance, they're feeling the blocks, they're getting different weights, they're experimenting with the blocks, they're learning about gravity. And the other thing is that they're learning persistence, which is a really important trait.
Yeah.
And another problem with what happens on devices is that it comes so quickly and so easy that babies tend to start expecting instant gratification.
Right.
And so what they're not learning about is the value of the long haul. I mean, I watched a baby recently who's 13 months and had figured out how to open and close the seal on baby wipes. You know, the little clicky thing that goes up and down.
Yeah.
And that baby spent 20 minutes over and over and over again. She would open it up, and then she would close it, and then she would hit it to make sure it was closed. She did that over and over and over again.
Sweet.
And I watched another baby, play with a toy that involved putting something in a hole. And that baby really worked at it and had the experience that working at something, can have payoffs.
Yeah.
And I think that that's something that people don't think about when they think about screens for babies.
Yeah. So if we decide to remove the device most of the time or all the time from the baby's hands, we have a choice in also the toys or the creative play that we give opportunities for them. So can you describe, and I found this part really interesting in your book, can you describe why parents might want to opt for a more generic, unrecognizable doll versus a commercialized figure like Elsa or Cookie Monster?
There's so many answers to that question. I mean, it sounds simple, but there's a lot of answers to it.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing, so for one thing, you're talking about toys linked to media, media linked toys. And, I think as you suggested earlier, just about every program for children is designed to sell them something. And characters are a really, really big deal to kids. Kids get very attached to media characters. But then if all their toys are media characters, they're not creating because they already know the voice. They know what the character looks like. They know the story. And once they know all those things, it's really hard to deviate from that. I don't know if you've ever tried to persuade a child to do something not that they haven't seen in a television program or a movie with a media link character. I have. And it's not, I've never been successful. They already know. I mean, they're just, determined. So kids play less creatively with media link toys, but they also play less creatively with toys that talk and cheep and chirp and move, and which so many toys for kids today are toys that do all of those things. And basically, really what happens is that the toy ends up having more fun than the child. I mean, the toy is moving and laughing and doing all those things, and all a child's doing is pressing a button. The best toys are 90% child and only 10% toy. The best toys for kids just lie there until someone picks them up and transforms them and makes them into something or makes them do something. Those are the toys that really benefit kids. And the problem is that they're kind of derided by marketers as, oh, they're retro, they're so old-fashioned. You need to get your baby, toys that will sing the alphabet to them and will talk to them and that kind of thing. But that's not what young children really need. And also, those are the toys that end up being used once or maybe twice, and then they're not fun anymore.
Right, because you can't you can't make it do anything that it's not already doing. It's already doing what it's made to do. Right. And I just love that imagery of like playing with a Cookie Monster. Like, what Cookie Monster sounds like, where he lives, who his friends are, what he likes. He likes cookies. But so like you can't get really creative around that. It's very defined on what he can do and be for the child.
It's not necessarily that the problem is with the characters themselves.
Okay, yeah.
There are some really great media characters that, even for preschool kids, that are great models or really fun, and kids become very attached to them. But the problem is that, as I was kind of saying earlier, all of these characters come with zillions of toys or food or clothing or wallpaper or quilts. And so what starts to happen, and the thing is that babies, for instance, thrive on familiarity. So if a baby sees Elmo and laughs at Elmo, and then the parents and the grandparents and the aunts and uncles all think, oh, wow, it's Elmo. Elmo is magical. Then they get all this Elmo paraphernalia for the child. Pretty soon, it becomes that Elmo is more important than any other character or than having creative time. So it's not that I have anything against Elmo.
Right.
Or most characters, Dora the Explorer, for instance, as a character, it's the business model for how children's media makes money these days is problematic because they make money through brand licensing.
Are you familiar with the Waldorf education approach?
Yes, yeah, I am.
Okay. I was interviewing a former Waldorf teacher recently, and she was talking about how they offer toys for the early childhood students that are, less form and kind of you have to be creative to figure out like what this is that you're playing with. And I just thought that was an interesting connection to what you were saying in your book. Okay, I'm going to jump back to some of the EdTech stuff because this gets me and my kids. You're probably familiar with how much our children are using technology in school. Even starting in kindergarten, they're being given iPads or tablets of some kind. So just generally, what are your thoughts about the current state of EdTech in the public school system?
My thought is that it's a mess, basically. I mean,
Yeah,
really,
agree.
schools are struggling, public schools are struggling for funding. And then here come these corporations with these shiny new products or giving. Wouldn't it be great? You can give your child an iPad, and isn't that wonderful? But the companies aren't doing it out of altruism. They're doing it because the best way to create brand loyalty is by starting out in childhood. So, a baby with an iPad or a kindergartner with an iPad is, has a good shot at growing up to be an Apple product lover from the
Right.
very beginning. And
Right.
the other thing that these products they're put into schools without any research showing that they're actually beneficial. And there's starting to be research coming out showing that kids who spend a lot of time using computers in schools actually aren't doing as well as they might. They're not learning as effectively.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also a message that we don't need teachers, because what the tech industry calls using these devices, they call it personalized learning. That's how
Where's
they're
the
sold.
person? Right.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. Where's the person? But also
Yeah.
it's that a child can spend a lot of time on a device without
Mm-hmm.
quote needing any adult help.
Okay.
And so what's missing is the relationship between the teacher and the child. And it's another example of the way that, the tech industry is really doing everything it can to replace the adults in children's lives with machines. And I know that
Mm.
sounds like hysterical or like I'm exaggerating, but honestly, if you take a deep dive into how these products are marketed, or if you look at the marketing for what are called personalized robots these days, they are, designed to keep kids from being lonely and to be companions, to help kids with homework. All these things that, first of all, they're not going to be less lonely with a machine. And also, the information that kids can get from devices can be really problematic.
Oh, yeah. There's the whole issue that they're not learning or absorbing as much from a screen as they are from paper. We're also blocking the face-to-face interaction between the student and the teacher. But then also, they're not locking down these school-issued devices well enough. So the kids are getting onto Facebook or Instagram or YouTube on their school devices. So it's just all bad.
Right. I mean, that's a huge problem, with attention. I mean, I really support the phone-free schools movement. I think that we really need to get on that. I think the kids will benefit, the schools will benefit, society will benefit. I mean, if you think about it, just so kids are in school to learn things that they might not learn at home or, in the rest of their lives. And yet we allow them, even young children, to come to school with something in their pockets or in their backpack that is constantly calling to them, and that makes money by capturing attention. And so there's this constant pull
Yeah.
to be on a device. And, it's not just kids. I mean, adults have that as well. I know. I mean, I'm as addicted to my phone or whatever as anybody else is.
Mm-hmm.
There's this longing to be on it. And why would we give kids something to take to school that basically whose job is to distract them from what's going on in real life?
Why would we? I don't know.
It doesn't make any
It
sense.
makes no sense. And it seems like
Yeah.
It seems like an obvious solution to keep getting kids' attention back in the classroom is not to, number one, send it with them or to collect it at the front office on the way in or lock it up in one of those pouches. And most schools are trying to implement this, but the number one issue they're having is parents, because parents want their children to have the kid's device on them and want to be able to get a hold of them with whatever they need to get a hold of them about. So how do we get through to parents, the masses of parents who are still not seeing this clearly?
One of the things is that that fear is a great motivator.
Yeah.
And marketers know that, and they use fear to market products to kids. I mean, initially with tablets, it was, your child isn't going to be able to get a job in the 21st century unless, they have an iPad, which is, ridiculous, because the technology, when these kids grow up, it's not going to be swiping and tapping and whatever kids do on an iPad. It's going to be something else. So there's that fear, but there's also fear. What if my child gets lost? Or, parents and kids are all struggling with fears of school shooters. So I think that feeds into parents' fears as well.
Well, have you thought about, though, does a child having a phone on them in the case of a school shooting make them safer? Or does it make them more unsafe?
I don't know whether it makes them more unsafe. It doesn't make them safer. What it allows them to do is, text their parents, basically.
Yeah.
Right. I mean,
I've talked to several school administrators about this, and them having a phone on them when they're supposed to be quiet and down on the floor or in a dark room. And then now you have something that's lit up and loud. If there really is a school shooter coming into a classroom, where are they going to shoot to? They're going to shoot at the thing that lights up and makes noises. So to me, we just, parents need to think past the blind thought, it's going to make them safe, and think like, play it out for yourself. Does it actually make them safer? Anyway, I get the instinct. I'm a parent. I know I want to be there if my kid is not safe, but yeah, that's a tricky one.
It is
something that comes up a lot.
It is tricky. And it's also, it's like, stranger kidnapping, which is another thing that parents are more frightened of than they were, say, 25 years ago. And yet the statistics on stranger kidnapping haven't changed in the past 25 years. And so it's hard. And basically, parents, they love their kids.
Yeah.
We all love our children to the point of being irrational about them. Right. And marketers know that, and they exploit that.
Yeah. Right. And the predator thing is interesting, because it is, our children nowadays are actually at more risk on their devices when it comes to predators that can access them on these social media platforms and gaming platforms and things like that than they are outside, playing where there might be a actual stranger.
Right.
So,
and I'm glad you mentioned social media, because one of the things that I think is good in this country is that the conversation about tech has changed to some extent. Yes. And now people are concerned about social media for teenagers and preteens, and the links to social media use and depression and even suicide. I think that's really important.
Yes.
But what people are missing is that the tie or the pull to tech, it doesn't start in adolescence. It starts with babies and toddlers. It starts from the beginning of children's lives. And I really think that we need to expand the conversation beyond teenagers to include very, very young children. And one thing about being a parent is that we're so immersed in the age that our child happens to be. It's hard to think ahead. And so it's hard to see how having a baby watch videos on YouTube would actually impact what they're going to be like at teenagers. But then we go back to brain development and the fact that, the neurons that get connected are the ones that get used. And the more you do something, the more likely you are to continue it. So there is, the more that young children are on screens, the more likely the longer they're going to be on screens when they're older.
Okay, that's a really important note. Thank you. And I think a lot of parents think, okay, YouTube Kids, it's for kids. It's not going to be harmful. Social media, you can sign up at 13 without parental approval. So it must be safe for 13-year-olds. Can you share any insight into, are these tech companies worried about making their platforms safe for our children?
The purpose of all of this media is to sell us things. That's how the companies make money. The purpose of these companies is to generate profit for their executives and their shareholders. So I think, the idea that what they create for kids is good for kids is something we need to take, as a professor of mine used to say, with a pillar of salt.
Right.
There are people who make children's media who really do care about children and who do want to make media that is beneficial to children. The problem is today we don't have real public media, and public media is terribly underfunded. And so most of what kids are exposed to is commercial media, the purpose of which is to generate money through advertising.
Right. And in order to generate that money, they just need the kid to stay on there as long as possible, which requires quick clips, addictive content, addictive algorithms. And I get some comments sometimes about the algorithms, people saying it just gives you what you're interested in. Adults will say, my Instagram feed is just all, motorcycles and whatever they're interested in. But I think it can be more complicated than that, specifically for children. Do you have anything to share around like our kids' access to an algorithm through their feeds?
They have access to algorithms every time they go online.
Yeah.
The model, because the purpose, the way that these companies make money is to generate attention. I think the fact that on social media, not just for kids, but for adults, that what we get is what we've indicated interest in is problematic. It's certainly problematic for news. We shouldn't be getting news that we like all the time. We need to be getting news that is honest and objective. And we're not going to do that if what social media companies, send us are things that we have indicated interest in.
Right. And a lot of times they're giving you things that are going to piss you off. So they want that reaction. And especially with kids, they'll serve them things that are the more sticky things that they'll end up engaging with more are things that give them like not a positive reaction. So, and I also hear a lot about the difference between how adults are fed content versus children. And so the parent will say, well, I don't see that kind of thing on my feed. But these companies study kids' brains and know exactly what to serve children to keep them on the platform. And just unfortunately, it can be harmful, violent, inappropriate content.
It can certainly get there.
Yeah. And on this podcast, I highlight a lot of those harms. So I interview parents whose children have been harmed or child has died, whether it's through a choking challenge or a pill that they got connected with a drug dealer on Snapchat and were sold a pill, or were being cyberbullied so bad that they took their life. And so I think, those are extreme cases, but these are real families. And so I always try to amplify those stories.
And, I think that one of the things that we really need to think about is what we want for young children is to have them, they need to be fed and housed and loved and all of those things. But what we want is for them to be curious about the world, about, what the tech industry calls IRL, in real life. We want them to take pleasure in exploring the world and to want to explore the world and to believe that they have the internal resources to do that. And they're not going to get that from being online.
Yeah.
They're going to get that from having experiences in nature, if possible, or with other kids, with other adults. And if they don't have those experiences and they don't grow up with the sense that fun doesn't have to come from a device, there are other satisfying ways to have fun or to spend time. If they don't have that experience, how are they not going to be on Snapchat 7, 8 hours a day, or on TikTok rather, 7 or 8 hours a day?
Yeah.
They're not going to have anything in their life that has shown them another way.
Yeah. And it's a societal shift, like you said, and it's the parents also modeling healthy behavior. And what tips do you have for parents? So towards the end of your book, you have a great number of tips, but what stands out for you with these listeners here being parents? So Dr. Linn is about to go into a number of tips for parents related to online safety, but I wanted to pause here and offer some hope. Online spaces can be scary and overwhelming for parents to monitor, but luckily we have tools like the Bark phone and the Bark app, which can give us peace of mind. Bark goes way beyond device mirroring, using advanced AI to scan texts, social media, images, videos, and audio for threats like drug content and cyberbullying, even child sexual abuse material. The harms of social media are scary, and tools like Bark can help ease that fear. The Bark phone is the most customizable kids phone with text and social media monitoring built in. It's the safest option. But if you are going with an iPhone or an Android, please consider layering on the Bark app, which is a high-tech parental monitoring. It scans their activities for harmful content, allows you to create screen time schedules, block certain websites and apps, and a ton more. So let's get back into my conversation with Dr. Susan Linn.
Let me just say one thing.
Yeah.
I have a lot of sympathy for parents today. I think it's really, really hard to be a parent because we are living, in a culture, a tech-dominated culture, a business-dominated culture that is really, harmful for children. And that's hard for parents to deal with. I think one thing is it's easier to give something than it is to take it away. So honestly, if you can postpone, maybe except for video chatting with the adults who love your kids, postpone your introducing them to child-directed content on screens until 3, really. Like watching television, for instance, which is what most young children do on devices anyway. They need to be able to follow a storyline. So there can be benefit to some watching stories or quality non-commercial television shows for preschool kids. It's possible, but what parents have to realize is that what today goes along with that is marketing for all of the characters or whatever. So if you can postpone it or minimize use when the kids are younger, I think what you'll find is that you'll have kids who will be able to amuse and soothe themselves without needing a device. So, that's one thing. I really urge parents to, look at wait until 8th and avoid getting their kids a smartphone until at least 8th grade. Try to find other families who share your values.
Yeah.
Try to get active in the PTA and do something about the way that tech companies are so, present in schools these days. So that's something. And the other is you need to watch your own tech use.
Yeah.
First of all, because it does take you away, just like it does your kids, from what's going on around you. So you do have to watch your own, and kids model what you do. And I think you need to remember that it's not hopeless and that you're not depriving your young child of anything that they need.
Right. In fact, by removing the device, you're actually giving them more of what they need, and that's interaction with you.
Right. But it's hard to be alone.
Yeah.
It's hard to be alone in this and finding supports either in your neighborhood, in your school, in your family, in your faith community, whatever, I think that that could be really helpful. So you're not feeling like you're fighting this all by yourself. And the other thing is to, get involved in organizations that are fighting for the rights of your child to have, a healthy child-centered childhood. Fair Play, which is the organization that I and some colleagues founded many years ago. They're doing fantastic work now.
Yeah.
So I suggest taking a look at that. And that's a way to find people who share your values.
Yeah, and that's fairplayforkids.org. And I love that organization.
Me too.
Yeah. Lastly, on the tips, what would you advise on social media access? Like if you had younger kids right now, would you just wait as long as possible? Would there be a certain age? I know every kid is different, but what would you advise parents around social media?
Well, the companies themselves, say that you're not supposed to be on it until you're 13 anyway.
Right.
So I certainly wouldn't want to do anything before that, for sure. You need to, talk to your kids about your concerns. It's hard.
Yeah, that's a really hard one. And kind of, there's not a real good solution. And every parent just has to make that decision, do the research and make that decision on their own. I'm hopeful for some legislation to pass this year on the federal level to help regulate those big tech social media companies a little bit better. And hopefully that will give some breathing room to the parents.
As a longtime activist, I'm thrilled with how far the legislation has come. I mean, when I started out doing this work, honestly, people would laugh about it or say that it was impossible.
Wow.
And the fact that a bill to regulate tech companies and what they do to children actually passed the Senate is amazing to me. So I'm hopeful.
Did you see the discussion draft for the new bill last night? It's to sunset Section 230.
I did not.
Okay. It's brand new. I'll email you the link to the press release.
Oh, great. Yeah, I'd love to see it.
Oh, that would be incredible. Before we close out, though, I wanted to touch just really briefly on your years of experience with puppet therapy. I find that so interesting. So just tell me a little bit about what you do there.
I began life as a ventriloquist and earned my living that way for a lot of my life. I worked with Fred Rogers. I was on his program and also made videotapes about difficult issues for kids with puppets. Did performances all over and also pioneered the use of puppets as a tool for play therapy at Boston Children's Hospital here.
Wow.
And later at the Children's AIDS program. I mean, puppetry is an incredibly valuable tool for therapy or just for, playing with kids. There's something, magical about having a puppet that can say things and do things that you wouldn't ordinarily say and do. So to be able to kind of hide behind a character is really neat.
Did you get into that as a child?
I did. I started when I was 6. Most ventriloquists do actually start as children.
Interesting.
Yeah.
How did you get introduced to it?
I saw a ventriloquist on television.
Really?
I know there is an irony. I get the irony. I get the irony that, I've made public service announcements for kids on, for television. I work, as I said, I worked with Fred Rogers. I mean, television, we think of it as so passé, but television was incredibly powerful and is still.
Yeah.
It's not the medium, it's the business model that's the problem.
Right.
The medium is incredibly powerful, these screens and what they do, but it's the business model. Basically, it's greed that's the problem.
Yeah. Greed at the risk of just harming a generation of kids, which just, you don't understand how some of these tech executives sleep at night sometimes. It's confusing to me.
Right. And also that at least some of them protect their own kids while harming other kids.
Yeah, by sending them to low-tech Waldorf schools or not letting them use their own products.
Or Steve Jobs.
Yeah.
The famous quote from Steve Jobs when asked what his kids thought about the iPad, he said they've never seen one. And yet, he didn't do anything to try to convince parents not to give their kids iPads.
Why are his kids more important than our children, Susan?
Right. Well, I think that there is a sense in this country that, it's all up to the individual, and our family is more important than any other family. If our kids are fine, it doesn't matter about other kids. And I think, as a society, we need to think we love our kids best. Of course we do.
Yeah, right.
But we need to think about other people's children as well. And I don't think that children should be punished because their parents don't know things, or their parents, make decisions that may not be best for them, or their parents don't have access to important information.
Right.
I find that quote from Steve Jobs, I've understood it differently over the years, and it's just so cynical.
It is. Every parent in America or the world needs to hear that quote and really think on their own decisions. And despite sharing all these scary things and harmful things, we try to stay hopeful, right? And we can have some control over our decisions in our household. And we can support legislation that will help protect our children. So trying to stay hopeful in those ways and provide parents with resources. I've been posting quotes from your book for a couple of weeks now, and I've had 20 people say, "What book is that? What book is that?" So I've just been like,
"Oh, great,
pimping out your book," because people are really resonating with the content. So,
oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah, reading and having access to these longer form pieces. I mean, a lot of parents are still reading books, paper books, and taking notes and using that information to apply to their own family's decisions. So listeners can get a copy of your book, Who's Raising the Kids, at susanlinn.net, right?
Yes.
All right, Dr. Linn, thank you so much for everything you do to help parents guide our children through this digital heavy world and kind of expose how all of these things work. It was fascinating for me to dig into your book, and I hope a lot of other listeners do as well. And thank you. I appreciate you for being here.
Well, thank you. It was great talking to you.